topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. It is Tuesday morning, and today we are having quite a bit of rain, and they're even predicting thunder and tornadoes. So I'm glad that we still have power. Hopefully the power stays on and that we are able to have our conversation with you. So what I want to share is what recently happened. Actually, it was sometime last year. I know it feels so... It's just, we are a few days into the new year. It's still I'm still thinking we're in 2023. We are not. So couple of probably sometime in December, I was having a conversation with my client, and my client goes and says that, okay, we have set a lot of goals for me. What about you? I'd just like to know about that. And then it came to me that as I was reflecting upon 2023, and as we go into the New Year's, remember that only 8% of people achieve their goals. So usually we go with, okay, what's the one word for the year? So this year we are going with 3 words, and I'm going to share one of my words that I'm working on is consistency. And how can we build habits that become automated, just like, driving your car or brushing your teeth, or you don't have to even think about it. So yes, what I'm doing is I am building consistency. And if you are looking to build tiny habits that can get you to be those 8% who achieve the New Year's resolution, you can get our free gift. And you can see it. It's success.divyaparekh.com at Atomic Habit Gift. So because I want you to be successful. That's the key. So let's bring in our guest. Welcome, Dr. Martin.
I'm pleased to be here with you, Divya.
Absolutely. So share with us, do you recall any time from your childhood that still stands out for you today?
Oh, I think there are many, many times. I had a happy childhood. Always my parents encouraged me, lots of projects. I started out in a local newspaper, I think at the age of 7, and reported, fallen tree in backyard type of stories. No, I think there are a lot of different things from my childhood that I can relate on in England, where I grew up.
So what would be one that stands out for you? Or one or two?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think I had an unusual background in the sense that my parents were very much concerned with the overseas students that were flocking into London for education and yet having a hard time finding housing, finding other things. And so they used to host these vast parties in our home, 50 people from all over the world. And from every imaginable continent who were, in England studying for their degrees from various parts, particularly the Commonwealth. And so I was used to seeing talking to large numbers of people from large different countries. one result was I had the most phenomenal stamp collection because they all sent Christmas cards from all over the world later. And, so I got a complete collection of every stamp that existed from Ghana or whatever. It was amazing. So yeah, it was a very interesting background that I was exposed to.
Yeah, that's fascinating that not only we're exposed to different cultures, because every culture, people coming from different regions, even though we share so many commonalities, they have their own tweaks and traditions and different perspectives. So as you grew up, when did you know that you wanted to go in medicine?
Well, I knew I wanted to go into science. I was clearly, I found my affinity in that. And then I was interested in, how do I apply it to human benefit, to, making a difference. I actually had a glimmer that I wanted to get into medical science as opposed to just medicine. As soon as I got to college and had my first classes in physiology, I knew that's where I wanted to be, at the study of how the body normally works. That led me on a very interesting career over the years with some great teachers and so forth. But a chance to really be at the beginning of a scientific field of circadian clocks and be right at the outset, which is a great place to be in any scientific field. So, yeah.
So as you were studying different courses and different areas of medicine, medicine is taught to be very, very, sometimes a lot of people say that you gotta have really, really good memory to become a doctor. Do you think that's a true myth?
Well, I think there are various attributes. I mean, one of the things is learning human anatomy and all the nerves and blood vessels and where they all go. Certainly requires memory. I remember one of my professors up there saying, you are going to be, one way of measuring intelligence is by the size of your vocabulary. How many words do you know? We're going to double that because of course you've got the whole medical, and they hold up a medical dictionary with the same number of words as in the regular Oxford English dictionary. So yes, there's memory there. There are a lot of things to medicine. There's technologies there are skills there. And then of course, you've got to successfully relate that to people and have the skills to listen to people. So it's a challenge doing something very technical, but also having to explain it to people of a wide range of backgrounds and levels of understanding and levels of, IQ and everything else. You've got to be able to explain to everybody, and you get to see a lot of things.
Of course.
Which you normally wouldn't be exposed to.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. That makes sense. So what would you say that as you finish your medical school were your 2 or 3 lessons that you've carried with yourself throughout your life?
Well, number one, I knew I took a detour out of medicine to do an honors degree in physiology. So I knew I wanted to specialize in the science. I actually started a number of medical research projects while I was in medical school. I recruited my classmates to spend a week in bed collecting blood and urine samples every 3 hours around the clock in order to study the phenomenon I was interested in, which was these circadian rhythms, these changes in body function around day and night. Also one of my early projects was I had a opportunity to go to America early on while I was in medical school, actually a couple of times. First time I spent on an American Indian reservation. It was a so-called work camp, a social camp, helping them with their, but I did a study then of diabetes in the American Indian population, which I published. And very good, advice from, trying to write for a scientific audience is very different than writing for a non-scientific audience, learning those skills. I also had a chance when I was in medical school to spend a summer at Stanford University, and I was assigned to the NASA Ames Space Center. And this really dates me, but this was back in 1968, before the moon landing. And I was given the task of, since I had a background in physiology, of actually figuring out what happened to blood flow in the lung of the astronauts on the moon's surface, where you have 1/3 the normal gravity. And there's a phenomenon to do with the blood flow in the lung and the airflow in the lung and how the two mix together, something technically called VAQ ratios. And I built a computer program. I was asked to build a computer program to model what would happen when the astronauts landed. And that was an interesting challenge. I'd never programmed a computer in my life before. I went down to the Stanford bookstore, found a book on Fortran. These are the days of the huge mainframes and punch cards and the old computers. And the sort of thing that you could do in an afternoon on a Apple computer or whatever, this was a massive effort to do those days. One bug in it, and you had to run the whole thing. But you go take the base taxi down to the big data center, computer center, load up your cards. The answers would come, the run would come back later that afternoon, and you pick up a huge stack of paper with it. But yeah, I did my bit, I'd like to say, putting man on the moon. A small bit, but a little bit.
So definitely sounds like, your life has traversed through very, very interesting landscapes. So when did you arrive when you got interested in the circadian rhythms? And, we spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping, and that too if you get good sleep. So tell us what got you interested in that.
Well, I heard a very inspirational lecture by a professor, Jürgen Aschoff from Germany, who was one of the pioneers in the field while I was in medical school, so I was intrigued. It didn't become really real until after graduating from medical school, I headed off to Toronto, where I had family, to do my surgical internship. And I found myself on the job 36 hours nonstop, 12 hours off, back in for 36, 12 hours off, and so forth, 108 hours or what plus a week, walking around like a zombie under bright fluorescent lights all day long, and totally scrambled with my sleep, my fatigue. I was nodding off in the operating room, surgeon yelling at me at 3:00 in the morning as the hand slipped. I was writing prescriptions I couldn't make sense of the next day. I wasn't the only one, obviously. Everyone working these incredible schedules they put young doctors through. And that actually got me so interested that I took a detour out of surgical residency as on my way to do, cardiac surgery or something like that. And I took a detour and came down and got a place in the PhD program at Harvard Medical School to study these circadian rhythms. And I got the opportunity to work in the surgery department under Professor Franny Moore, who was really a pioneer in the whole field of surgical research. And I did my PhD in the physiology department. And so I was able to do my postdoc and my PhD at the same time, which was it was actually a fairly efficient way of doing it. But along the way, that's when I really dug into circadian rhythms and how they worked. And that started my whole career. I was warned off that field, by the way, because people were telling me, senior professors at MIT and Harvard were saying, this is a nonsense field, there's nothing to it, it's just electromagnetic effects of the Earth's rotation. No one's ever discovered a biological clock in the brain or anywhere else. And this is all before the first discovery of the circadian clock, first of all in mice and rats and hamsters. And then later on, when I became a professor at Harvard, I led the team that discovered where the circadian clock was in the human brain. In other words, the clock controls.
Why don't we that's a very fascinating story, people wanting you off. So most people have heard of circadian rhythms and circadian clock, but if you can give us a full picture as to what is a circadian rhythm and how does the circadian clock work for human beings?
Absolutely. Well, we all recognize that we normally have a pattern where we tend to be sleeping at night and tend to be active during the day. And along with that, almost everything in our body, our temperature of our body, our hormone levels, everything else changes on a cyclical pattern. Now, all the different functions of the body have different patterns. So body temperature peaks in the evening hours, cortisol, or stress hormone, peaks just before you wake in the morning, growth hormone peaks just after you fall asleep. So we've got this whole orchestra, this orchestra of circadian rhythms, which are all synchronized to the day-night cycle in the normal world. Now, of course, when you work irregular hours or up to 24 or 36 hours like I was, you are disrupting that whole pattern. You're disrupting it. But everyone thought that was just the first response, people were thinking this is just a passive response to day and night and so forth. But in fact, when you study animals or people in environments where there are no time cues whatsoever, no windows, no clocks, nothing to tell the time of day, the pattern keeps on going. It's an intrinsic circadian rhythm. It runs slightly off 24 hours, closer to between 24 and 25 hours in length. The cycle keeps on going, and it's synchronized by light. And that was one of the key discoveries we made. I mean, it was well known in animals it was synchronized by light, in fruit flies and in hamsters and in rats and every other. But when I entered this field, it was thought that humans weren't synchronized by light, and it was thought that humans didn't have a circadian clock. Those are two major things we were able to prove were wrong, that humans do in fact have a circadian clock, and humans are in fact synchronized by light falling on the eyes and passing through a special pathway to the circadian clock, which is one of the more primitive parts of the brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. We call it SCN for short, much easier to pronounce. But that's the master clock. But not the only clock in the body, because every cell in the body and every tissue in the body has its own circadian rhythms, its own circadian clocks. So we really have a whole orchestra of these rhythmic processes in our body that are essential to function, to growth, to cell repair, to metabolism. We're really built a very precisely timed machines, the human body.
So basically what I'm hearing is that nature gave us pre-programmed, not only we have that circadian clock in our brain, but we also have in every cell and every tissue, how intelligent nature is. Now here we come, and then we change all these patterns and all that. So tell us, if somebody were to live an optimal life, and so many people are getting into wellness now, so what would a good day look like? So for example, a lot of people are wondering, okay, especially for youngsters, staying out late until 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, and then going to sleep and sleeping during the day. Or for that matter, there are a lot of people who work late night. What would you tell them is an optimal day looking like?
Well, the optimal day is to follow a healthy, light diet. Just like your nutritional diets, you need a light diet. What you need in the mornings is you need access to bright daylight. In other words, you need to get outside because the indoor lights we have are so dim. We literally live in twilight levels indoors. So that, many homes are lit at what we could measure in one measurement is lux, like 50 lux, or in a brightly lit office would be 500 lux. But outdoors, it's 50,000 lux to 100 lux. That bright light is really essential to our health. The sunlight is curative, and it's curative because of all its elements. I think people often don't think of light. I mean, by the way, white light is not a color. White is the synthesis of all the colors of the rainbow. We only see those colors when sunlight hits raindrops in the sky and we get a rainbow, or light falls on a crystal and forms a color pattern in your wall. Light is made of all those colors, and each of those colors has a health component to it. That's what we're discovering these days. And out of all that, it turns out the circadian clock is highly sensitive to a very specific blue color, for example. When we discovered the circadian clock, discovered it was synchronized by light, we thought any white light would do. In fact, it's a blue light, it's a sky blue color, and it's a fascinating story because sky blue light, which can measure around 480 nanometers, what visible light is somewhere between 400 and 700 odd nanometers. That's the scale. That's the part of the spectrum that we can actually visually see. Below that is ultraviolet. Above that is our infrared. But in that range, around 480 blue, that's a sky blue color, not a royal blue color, not a violet blue, but a sky blue color. That color is detected by receptors in the eye called IPRGCs, intrinsically sensitive retinal ganglion cells, special receptors in the eye, not involved in vision, not involved in our ability to see, just like I'm looking at you through a computer screen. These are detecting the amount of blue that's coming in, and that's the key cue. Other colors of the rainbow and sunlight, by the way, red is curative and cell repair, it makes your hair grow. Green relieves you from pain and stress and relieves migraines, for example. Violet light is very effective at killing bacteria and viruses, all sorts of elements of the light. So there's a lot of health in the light spectrum. And the only place you can get a full dose of that is outdoors, whether it's in sunlight or even in daylight, because, even in daylight, it's many times brighter than it is. So that's the morning treatment.
Definitely.
As you go into later on in the day, as you approach evening, certainly, you want to avoid that blue light. And unfortunately, our modern day LEDs pump us full of bright blue light well into the evenings, whether it's coming from the light bulb, light fixtures, the computer screens, our tablets or iPhones or whatever, or mobile devices. That blue is a real problem. And so one of the big inventions I've been involved in recently is identifying that precise blue that's causing the problem. You want to see the blue during the day, but you want to avoid it at night. And so
interesting. So
go ahead.
kind of like rewinding back, you mentioned that it's important to go outside. So are you talking about a full hour, like in the direct sunlight? Because then there is, of course, the UV light that can cause damage to skin cells, or it's like, you can be just outside and it does not have to be in direct sunlight.
It's better in the mornings before noon. So in other words, you don't want the full middle of the day type sun exposure, but you want the exposure of light before it gets into the full, high in the sky light. But the effects are enormous. So the effects, people who live indoors and don't go outside have an increased risk of early death equivalent to smokers. So in other words, you take 29,000 Swedish women, they studied them, they looked at how many hours did they spend outside. Those that spend most time outside lived longer, significantly longer, years and years longer than those that were indoors all the time. So we know exposure to light. We also know that exposure to light in the mornings is the critical time. Fascinating studies in psychiatric hospitals, in Scandinavia in particular, where they've looked at hospitals where one half of the hospital has rooms that are facing east and south, so they're seeing all the morning sunlight streaming in through the windows. The other half of the hospital had rooms on the opposite side of the corridor facing north and west, and the patients admitted to the sunlight-filled rooms in the morning, the east and south rooms, facing rooms, were discharged in half the time as compared to those with the same psychiatric illness, the same doctors, the same drug and everything else. That light is curative. So we know that morning light is the key, and that's the key that actually keeps our circadian clock synchronized, keeps us healthy. So getting out in the mornings is key, and as I say, not too late in the day, ideally. And people are concerned. There's been all sorts of publicity about skin cancers and other things, exposure to light. It turns out this effect is way bigger than any risk of increased skin cancer. So that's a very key part of the day, getting out in the mornings and being exposed to light. I do it every day religiously. And, whether you're walking, you're running, you're sitting outside, it's a good time to exercise too, obviously. But that's a very key part of the day.
Right. And so many times what happens is in the winter time, especially like the daylight savings time, people may not have time and they're going to work. So what I'm hearing is that even if you are outside for a shorter period of time, it's going to be beneficial than having none at all.
Absolutely, yes. No, you want to try to get out for at least half an hour to an hour if you can. But it's the brightness of the light that's critical. Yeah, and just do not get it inside.
Right. And as you mentioned about the blue light coming from our artificial devices, and of course there are studies after studies that have shown that sometimes the blue light can even cause insomnia. So tell us about the blue lights coming from computers, light bulbs, and our phones. What can people do? What kind of screens or what can they do that they can minimize that? Of course, now our whole life, we are practically living through computers and our devices. So what can people do to reduce that exposure?
Well, first of all, blue is not good or bad. It's very important. It's the time of day you see it. So you want to see as much blue light as possible during the daytime hours. You want to avoid it during the evening and nighttime hours. So that's really the key. Because you confuse the body if you get the blue light at the wrong time. So the answer is don't use blue blocking glasses and so forth during the daytime. You want the blue. You do want that blue. But in the evenings, you need to be able to avoid it, whether it's blue blocking glasses. Unfortunately, many blue blocking glasses block entirely the wrong blue. There's a lot of misleading advertising there. There are also computer screens coming out now, and there's certainly lights coming out. In fact, there's a new line of lights coming out that are zero blue for the daytime, for the nighttime use. So they switch automatically between a high blue content during the day and a zero blue content during the night. And that is being proven to be enormously effective, reduces the risk of diabetes and heart disease, obesity, the long-term risk of cancers and so forth. So we've done a lot of work demonstrating that really controlling when you see this sky blue, this light, is absolutely critical to health. And regularity of your life is important. Make it as regular as you can. Sleep on a regular schedule. The other side of it is when you go to bed, sleep in the dark. Amazing numbers of people. The studies I've seen show maybe 30-40% of young people, over 50% of elderly people sleep with some lights on in the bedroom at night. And those that do have twice the risk of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. It's a huge effect. So sleep in the dark is the other side of it. In other words, it's most robust, because if you go back to the days before electric light, most people spent most of their time outdoors, exposed to light, daylight, and they spent their evenings, maybe they had candles or they had wood fires, but they have virtually no blue in candles and wood fires. It's only when we come to our energy efficient electric lights, particularly the LEDs and the fluorescents, that they're using blue because it's the most efficient way to convert electricity into energy, into light. And the challenge is that energy policy, which sounds so good, save the planet, save our climate, and so forth, is actually highly deleterious, highly injurious to our health. And so, one of the big messages out that we really can't use these LED lights. In fact, I just chaired a panel of almost 250 scientists, the leading scientists around the world, who reached the consensus that the regular LED lights you're buying in the hardware store these days should carry a warning label, may be harmful if used at night because of the severity of the problem and the strength of the scientific research showing there is a problem.
So that said, if it is so harmful to our health, what are the other alternatives?
Well, as I say, to get zero blue lights,
Mm-hmm.
a company called Chorus is bringing out both light fixtures for the ceiling, offices, and so forth, and for and also their light bulbs also that are zero blue. You can engineer light these days. One of the beauties about LEDs, by the way, is you can engineer any spectrum you want. In other words, you can actually create a relatively white light without any blue in it. And you would see it, the light goes slightly yellower than it would be, but it's not a big change, and it's certainly very comforting to the eyes as well. But those zero blue lights is what people need to look for. The other option, as I mentioned, is blue blocking glasses, providing they're blocking the right blue. They've got to be glasses that are relatively orange and yellow in color to block. That's the appearance you get when you block the blue. But essentially, those are things that people can do. And again, switch the lights out at night. You do not want any electronics that's shining light, particularly white or blue light. Red light is not really a problem. It doesn't really disrupt the pattern. So if you're going to have a clock in the bedroom, have a red light clock, not a blue or white light clock.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that Cars is coming out with it for offices, but what about people in homes? Because I'm sure our listeners and viewers are having this question. Where can they get? You had mentioned that those blue light blocking glasses block the wrong blue light. So where can they find the most appropriate glasses and those light bulbs?
Well, lights, the ones we've been involved in developing for the blue blocking glasses are ones that are called Blue Safe 24. That's engineered very specifically to block out the harmful blue for evening use. In terms of the light bulbs, you can get zero blue light bulbs at a Sora, the Sora store. If you search for Sora Zero Blue, and Sora is spelled SORAA, you can find light bulbs today that are zero blue light bulbs. As I say, in a month or two, they're coming out with light bulbs that will automatically provide you blue-rich light during the day and switch to zero blue in the evenings. But yes, those products are available. And, it's one of the inventions that I did when I was faced with this problem because, to go back a little bit, there we were in about 2007, and the World Health Organization just declared that light at night was carcinogenic because of the 50% increased risk in breast cancer in women, for example. And because, women who've never seen electric light don't get breast cancer, or very rarely get breast cancer. Whether you're in parts of Africa, as the image behind me show, very low rates of breast cancer, much higher rates, more than 5-fold increased rates in areas of the world where there's a lot of electric light, like Western Europe or in America. And so that finding back in 2007 said to us, what companies were asking us, our clients were asking us, what do we do about this problem? Because we can't switch off the lights at night. We can't stop our business at night. If you're running an oil refinery or a call center or a hospital, you can't stop business and you can't switch off the lights. What do we do about it? And that got me interested in the challenge. And that's when we started probing as to what exactly the problem. We identified this blue spectrum and then went on to develop and patent LEDs that produce the correct blue, i.e. high in that sky blue during the day and absent with zero sky blue during the nighttime hours.
So a lot of people are probably intrigued as we have talked about it because there's a lot of complexity to it. And I can see the book in your background. Can you tell us more if somebody wanted to figure out and wanted to even kind of see, what lights to have in their house? And so where can we find more details?
Well, first of all, I wrote The Light Doctor because I wanted to make this accessible to everybody. There really is, everyone needs to understand that the light they see is as important to their health as the food they eat, the water they drink, and the air they breathe. And what in fact is the basis of it, and how do you understand all this? And so I wrote that for the general reader. It's currently available on Substack. And if you just search for The Light Doctor on Substack, the whole book is online right now. And then I'm producing the print version later on this year. But it had a very good, it's best-selling on Substack, a very good response. But it's really trying to explain for the average person who's not a scientist, but needs to understand the light they need to protect the health of themselves, their children, their families, what lights to demand in schools and hospitals, because the world has been taken over by this, enthusiasm for blue-rich LEDs that are static, never change the blue content day and night. And that's causing a ton of harm, a huge amount of harm. And the lighting industry is sort of understands this now, I think, but they're still, they're still pumping out these lights that are harmful. And I think we're running into an asbestos scale liability problem right now if the lighting industry doesn't change. So I'm very pleased to see it starting now to introduce lights that actually are designed to be healthy, because this is an environmental pollutant, blue light at night, not blue light during the day, but blue light at night. And yet it's one of the most easy of environmental pollutants to change. You just change the light bulb. In other words, cleaning up toxic chemicals or dealing with, forever chemical PFAS chemicals. This is easy. You just change the light bulb and change the lights you use. And so that's really the key.
Yeah, no, definitely. So thank you for sharing with us all the details. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, this is time to learn about light and to understand light, because as I say, there's a lot that people don't understand about light. We take it so for granted. The light switch on the wall is such an easy thing to flick on, don't think about anything. Light is not just for seeing, light is also for your health. There are elements in light that are critical for your health. So we tend to buy lights and have sold lights, and lights are advertised based on the ability to make our spaces attractive and pretty, and beautiful lighting is the key. But in fact, what really matters is that light healthy for you, and does it in fact keep our circadian clocks in order? Because our circadian clocks are absolutely fundamental for our health. People who exposed to light at night, a big study in England, 88,000 people in their average age in their 60s, studied about how much light they had on at night in their bedrooms and so forth. And those that had the most light died 30% faster, that population. They followed them over 10 years or so. They died 30% faster. It's a huge effect that we're aware of. Psychiatric illness is highly linked to depression, anxiety, 30% increased by exposure to the wrong light at the wrong time. And so a lot of the illness in our society, amazingly, is by something we didn't ever suspect. It's by the lights we're using. And that's something we can do a huge effect. It's one of the reasons, by the way, I believe that the average lifespan of the American male or female has really plateaued. It sort of, and actually it started going down a little bit, obviously because of COVID, but it really reached a peak. I think we can give many more people a healthier lifespan by the use of the right light at the right time. And so this is a mission. This is a key educational mission. I'm delighted to have a chance to share that with your audience, Divya, because you've got a big audience of intelligent people who, need to know and yet don't. And it's amazing to me. I've just spoken to producers of various shows, all the famous TV shows, Good Morning America, Today Show, and so forth. Virtually none of them understood this problem. And yet the scientists know it. And so, and as I say, I've got 250 scientists that are confirming this is very real and very serious and needs to be addressed. So this is one of the things that has to get into public consciousness, and it's so easy to fix, so easy to address.
Absolutely. So thank you for bringing it to our attention, and thank you for joining us, listeners. So we have shared the information with you. Definitely go check it out and see how you can improve your circadian rhythms, get good night's sleep, because we are committed to helping you live a very healthy, long, and happy life. So let us know how else we can support you and how we can help you to live the best life you can live. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Juan, for making this show technically possible. Be well and take care until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.